Hey there, Celebration Pros. Welcome back to your podcast. I'm your host, Karen Hunt, and today we have Meghan. Meghan, is your last name Ely? How do I pronounce it?
Ely, but I'll go by anything. It's fine.
When I was a wedding planner, people would ask, how do I say your name? I'm just like, just yell wedding planner. I will come running. Meghan is the owner of OFD Consulting. She's a certified wedding industry professional. And what she does is combining that in the trenches event experience with her love of PR. And now she empowers her clients, I am now one of them, to take their businesses to new heights. Her team's publicity efforts are regularly honored throughout the industry and recently by the Public Relations Society of America. And she was also named NACE Speaker of the Year. You can find Meghan pretty much anywhere in the wedding industry. She's a WeddingPro educator with the Knot WeddingWire, and she's a regular contributor to Wedding Planner Magazine, Catersource, specialevents.com, you name it. She's currently serving as the 2023 International Immediate Past President with WIPA and is also a member of the Allied Council for the National Society of Black Wedding and Event Professionals, which of course I've been holding near and dear to my heart because we've been speaking with a lot of the professionals that are part of that association. So Meghan, I'm so excited that we've connected, and I'm so happy to have you on the podcast today.
Well, thank you for having me. You were so gracious. Our meet cute included me filling out your form like 10 times in a row. Yes. So I'm glad it turned into this.
I mean, if nothing else, it caught my attention.
That's often how it starts.
But it turns out that you're running in the same circles that I'm running in. And I'm like, oh, do you know this person? You're like, yeah, I was texting him pictures of my cat today. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, anyone who hears that, they're like, that could have been me. And probably 5 people say that could be me.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Whoever's listening, you guys can try and figure that one out. That's awesome. Well, Meghan, obviously you have a very impressive background, and I love, as well as my listeners, love hearing that amazing success story. I'm sure there were, it was probably a roller coaster. So we're all curious on how you fell into the event world and what this whole journey has looked like for you up until now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny because it's kind of like, how did my life jump into PR and weddings and eventually, get ready for the pun, marry the two, right? I mean, yeah. How did that all come in? I'll say the PR side started in the funniest way. I was one of these, early in high school, filled out a career test on clackety clack, right, on these old computers in the 90s. And I said, you'd be great at PR. And I'll fast forward a bunch, but I kind of launched off of that. I'm like, well, if the computer program thinks I'm good at it. And over the years, like once I got a handle on what it was, I really did. I have this love of media since I was a little kid. I mean, I used to make magazines out of construction paper when I was in the 1st, 2nd, 3rd grade. And so I went to school for that. Now, my world of my world of weddings then came in college, and it was an arbitrary drive to the grocery store. I actually remember it well. And I thought to myself, just kind of thinking, because I'm in my PR classes, I'm very, very much enjoying them. But I thought, the wedding industry seems fun, exciting, happy. And I'd like to think a relatively happy person. I wonder if I could hang my hat there. Like, it was just this bloop in my head. And I started to explore it, which is kind of funny when you're, 20, 21, 22 here. And suddenly a lot of my college course work would be geared towards wedding industry stuff. Like, I did like a whole wedding planner agency as part of like a PR thing. I mean, they really did. I kind of wanted to test the waters. And so when I graduated with a degree in PR, I did want to take a year and do a year of service. So I did a year of AmeriCorps. I worked in the inner city schools. I loved children as well. And I loved working with them. I thought, well, this is the only time I can really do that. But in the meantime, I did a part-time job working at a local venue. I'd moved to Richmond, Virginia. I'm from New England originally. And I started working. So I was working 1 million hours with AmeriCorps in the schools, right? And then Tuesday, Thursday night, plus all weekend, I'm 22 and I'm running 5 weddings every weekend, plus probably 8 birthdays. I mean, when you're 22, you have all the energy in the world. So I was like, yeah, I can totally do that on top of a full-time job. So I fell into it. And here's the thing, absolutely backbreaking. I worked at a nonprofit, which means you have almost no support staff. You're moving tables, chairs. It's relentless work. And I could not have been happier. Like, I loved it. I was like, yep, I need to be here. And plus I have that type A personality, very organized, blah, blah. So over time, I jumped into the world of weddings, and, you know, I was always trying to fit PR in where I could, right? I had a couple of chocolate martinis at an association event, and oh, that's a true story. I became a write-in vote for the first PR person for a local wedding association that's now defunct, but like I found ways to put PR in my world.
Yeah.
And I moved up the ranks. You know, I worked in hotels, country clubs, and I basically said, listen, I'm going to exceed your sales goals, and when I do, I want you to toss some PR work my way. Like, I still want to stay fresh with that. And what I found was, at the end of the day, as much as I enjoyed events and I did corporate social, I did about 1,000. I mean, it was weird because I worked at a 5-star 5 diamond, but it was also volume. I know that sounds nuts, but like, we were doing a ton of weekday events, these huge, expensive weddings on the weekends and holiday parties, blah, blah, you know, that. And it was very satisfying to work with people on these milestone events. It genuinely was. I always said my favorite part was like bringing parents into the reception area before anybody else and let them see, because it's just very sweet.
Parents were always my favorite with
Oh,
events.
I love it. Like the good parents, not the ones like, what, you know, in the show them. I just have some favorites from over the years. But as much as I enjoyed that and felt honored to be a part of these milestone events, I realized two things. One, there was no satisfaction greater than even an inch mention in a local newspaper. Like the media stuff, you could have a teeny tiny inch mention in a magazine. That is going to fill my cup 1,000 times more. It's just where my heart is public relations and the media relations. But the other side of it is, as much as I liked working with the couples, I loved working with the vendors. Like, that was it. I was like, these are my people. I want to be with them the rest of my life. And so what I did was, to make a very long story short, but to show you the roller coaster effect, is I had that in the back of my head. I wanted to start my own, you know, boutique PR agency for the wedding industry, but not right away. So I accepted a job with a local caterer. I've scrubbed it, by the way, from the internet, so no one will ever land on where it was. Casual, well-recognized brand. I was going to make 6 figures. I was going to be, in 2009, I was one of the first and probably youngest in my area to be a director of catering, making that kind of money. Like, really, you know, just advocating for myself, sold like crazy. And the plan was to stay there for 2 to 3 years and just live. I knew how to live off of nothing from working in America, or like live off of a little and save to start my own business. Plans have a way of changing. I ended up, the boss was not a fit. That's, you know, because we're here sipping on coffee and not wine, that's as far as I'll go with that. And I made the decision to leave that job unceremoniously after about 4 weeks. We just bought a house. My future husband, spoiler alert, fiance at the time, about to pay for a wedding, and said, let's start OFD 2 or 3 years earlier. And that's how I came to pass. And I share all that because I know people can recognize themselves in some of that story, right? You get the bad boss who's scary. You've got, you know, going in this direction, then this, but that's how it all came to be.
I think the best entrepreneurs are the ones who are willing to pivot, right? The people who are willing to pivot and to not quit, but change things up and learn through things and grow through things. That's how you get to the next level. So,
although, may I add, if I may, really quick, one of the things with entrepreneurialism, though, and I just talked to my husband a few days ago, because I'm doing this for 14 years. And because I always consider that my get out of jail free card, like, I bet on myself. I worked part-time for a year doing association management, and went into the world of, you know, and did this on the side, and then blah, blah. But I always said this was untested. I hadn't done the research, and I made it work, but I consider that my get out of jail free. So every time I pivoted, added services, everything else has been tested with an initiative life, because I feel like I got one pass, but I don't go on gut the rest of the time. Like, everything else is tested as a result. So I wanted to say that is not a journey I continued in terms of like, why don't I just do this, you know?
Right. It's not all throwing spaghetti at the wall. I've been using that.
Exactly. It was the first time, and I feel very fortunate that it worked out for me.
Well, from your story, I was just telling a friend this, and I won't go too far into my own, but I started my first like quote unquote marketing company when I was like 7. So you're saying like when you were younger, you're like cutting. I'm like, oh my gosh, we have so much.
Oh my gosh, I love that.
And then just the way that you explain where you come from, your accomplishments and all of that, and I can see it in the space of OFD, is that you don't just teach PR, you teach graceful PR. You teach how to do it without making others feel less than. You speak to I did this and I'm pulling you with me. And so I think that that's something really special that can probably differentiate you from
Thank
others.
you. That's one of the kindest compliments I think I've ever received. And
Oh.
when we talk about PR, there's so many different ways to do PR. And somebody once said to me, one of my old clients and friends, I said, we just kind of handle it a little bit differently than a lot of people. And it's very people forward. It's not pushy. And she said, well, that's because you were in hospitality. That's a natural transition to PR. And I thought to myself, oh, so a lot of my future hires have a background in hospitality, because you can teach PR, but you can't teach that way of it. So thank you for the
Right.
compliment. That means a lot to me.
Absolutely. I think it's probably taking you really far in all of this. So working with so many event professionals and people in this creative space over the years, can you chat with us on like what your strategy around PR has been and how it's helped your clients achieve where they're at now?
That's a great question. We have a couple of different approaches depending on what their goals are. And I think it starts with just good old fashioned planning across the boards. I always say, I used to teach at a local university PR, and I always joke that, I go and teach PR 101 and they expect to do fun and cool and sexy things, like we're going to have parties and create press and things. And I'm like, well, like literally for 6 weeks, I'm going to teach about strategy, because we don't make a move before we understand what are the goals of the client. Where do they want to be? What's realistic? Because if someone comes to me and says, well, I just want you to only work with Vogue, I'll say, oh, are all your clients celebrities? Because otherwise I don't know how we're going to do, like, let's, set expectations. We want to know the goals. Want to know where they be, whether it's speaking, podcasts, real wedding features, any of that. From there, we want to make sure we've prepped everything. We always want people to know, listen, just make sure that, this isn't our side of it, making sure that your brand's in the right place and so forth. Because at the end of the day, PR is the call to action is sending people to your website, your social media. So they need to make sure they have their stuff together and updated and so forth, from there. And then, once we go, there's a few different ways we go with this. So I'm going to kind of go splitsies for a second, if you don't mind. If we're working on the real wedding submission side, which is a lot of what we do, we want to look at their portfolio. We want to understand there is a full onboarding. Even though we're a membership, we are high touch. And so I have a team. The other Meghan in my life, Meghan without an H, she actually created this great onboarding. So we know everything we set, and we're able to set expectations and just keep in mind. From there, we start reviewing. We want to see the content, start sending us your events, the celebrations, the things that you're doing, so we can better understand the work that you want to go out. There's certain things, basic things we ask. We'd love to know the logistics of when it was, who, what, when, where, and why, but also let us know anything interesting about it. Whether, you've got a mother of the bride who's very intent on print, like that may sound like, well, what does that have to do with anything? That has everything to do with everything. If the mom has enough of a say here. So give us all the context. And then from there, we'll start working out a strategy with you, a media strategy of where this can go, where it could potentially be placed. We're never going to recommend anything that minimally has a 50% chance, like in our books, based on what the editors are looking for, style, photos, things like that. And so that becomes a really great relationship. We work with a bunch of photographers, planners, venues on that end. In the meantime, we have something called PR leads. And so we have a lot of quote, you've seen them now that you've joined. We have a lot of leads coming in. So there are times where you might have a photographer who wants their weddings featured, but also be a noted photography expert. And so we'll get some sort of what are some tips for shooting a summer engagement session? We just did that with a Knot. We'll float that over to our photographers and say, hey, you've talked about being an expert in this place. Why don't we go in that direction? So that's one side of it. Now, with our thought leaders, of course, you being one of them now, which is very exciting, but we also want to get to know, of course, goals and strategies and so forth. And our goal really at that level is to supply the opportunities and help people land on what makes sense. What's your audience? Are you selling something to them? Like, what has to happen for all of this to be a success? And from there, you'll see on the thought leadership side, we're very focused on, I always say it's a 3-prong. I want people quoted or doing articles. I want them an expert on podcasts, and I want to see them speaking. And so you're going to see we work with them all very differently, but the thematic kind of part of it is tell us your goals. Let's look at the lay of the land to see what really makes sense for you and set some expectations, right? It's just like working with a couple. I want this, but I only have, but I have these parameters. Like, does that work? And then from there, it's a matter of execution.
Yeah, I love how personal it gets. Like they're looking at your work as a vendor. They're not looking at,
Yes.
okay, we got 10 weddings in front of us. We're going to throw them all at this submission. They're going to pick the ones that have the most, that are going to be most likely accepted and that fit your brand messaging and all of that. They take your story into consideration when they're helping you get to the next level in PR. So I think that's very valuable.
Absolutely. And it's twofold. It's for the client and to set expectations, because you don't want to sit and wait on a wedding. I'm not going to blow smoke and send something to Harper's Bazaar when it, at least until recently, they've been pretty understaffed and haven't been taking weddings from the looks. Like, why would I let you wait on that? And it doesn't make anyone feel better to send something that won't work. But to be honest, it's also about the editors. It's also about podcast hosts like yourself. I'm not going to send a slew of people your way unless I really do think they're a fit. Otherwise, I run the risk of editors and podcast hosts and conferences saying, well, Meghan's just going to throw things against the wall and see what we go for. Like that. I don't want that reputation for myself or for my clients.
Right. No, I think that's just as important, because we want you to work with the people that we want to work with. Right. You're that channel. You're that in-between person that's helping us get to where we want to be. No, that's great. So a lot, and this is a lot of what I teach is, I talk about stepping out in front of your business, getting the word out. No one's going to know what you do unless you tell them. There was this thought of, oh, if I build it, they will come. But if you build it, and nobody knows, like,
yeah,
we got to make sure that not only people know, but that the right people know. And so you're kind of helping fill that gap. So for the entrepreneurs that are listening and, they hear your message, they hear my message, and they're, maybe they're just that professional development junkie who doesn't actually implement. I can definitely say that I was one of those during time, but maybe they're feeling a little bit timid to take that first step out, and kind of being that face of their company. What advice might you have to maybe boost their confidence a little bit in this space?
Absolutely. I think it's about small wins. If we're going to assume that these entrepreneurs have given a good hard look and asked themselves the tougher questions first, let's assume they've already kind of got an idea about goals. They've got an idea about, what has to happen with PR strategies for me to consider this a success, right? So if they've done that heavy lifting, I think it's about small wins. I mean, that's human nature, right? Like, we're not going to, you just don't go for the big stuff. You want to start and feel good about that. And so I always recommend trying out, it's a free service. It's called Help a Reporter Out, or HARO, HARO. It's free. Anyone can sign up. And what it does, Peter Shankman found it many, many, many years ago. He's like a PR god to all of us in the industry. And what it says is everyone's an expert at something, and journalists are always looking for sources. So what you do is you sign up. It's free. There's a free level. That's really good. And then 3 times a day, Monday through Friday, with the exception of holidays, you're going to receive these robust emails, and it's filled to the brim with journalists looking for experts. Now, it's not all wedding and events, but it could be, I'm looking for someone who is a working parent, works from home and has 2 kids, or someone who has office pets or things like that. And then what it does is you click on the email and you're able to answer the questions they supply to you. You can pitch yourself. So it's not, you don't have to do all the research. You don't have to agonize, it's quick and dirty PR. You just send it out, and you're going to, if done well, of course, you're going to see some wins from that. And I think that's a great place to start.
Yeah, it's actually where I started. So for those of you listening in and you're like, oh my gosh, Karen's been published in Authority Magazine and Home and Gardens and these different places. And that's what I did. I specifically have these crazy emails. It's like 100 prompts, 3 times a day. It's insane.
Yeah, it is.
I have my other coach. She's got like a whole separate folder for HARO, because she's like, it just makes my inbox crazy. But when I go in, I'll just do like Control F, the little find search box that your computer has. And I'll type in wedding, business, entrepreneur, just kind of those keywords. And it really helps to filter through like what
huge difference.
Sometimes it's like what to feed your alligator, and you're like, this has nothing to do with.
Well, let me ask, I'm going to ask, do you have Gmail or Google Apps for Business? Like, do you run your email through Gmail interface?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm giving you like a hot tip, because I love the Control F, like looking for it. But here's my other tip to you and everybody else out there. You can set filters for keywords. So if you can set it up so that, you've got the exact match for like the subject line they always send, or maybe the email address they send. And what you can say is, if the word wedding is in this email, please highlight it as important and keep it in my inbox. Like, please put a star with it. So that makes it, I mean, it just cuts through it a little bit when you find yourself, because a lot of wedding pros are so bogged down. You know, at the time of this recording, we're heading into one of the busiest weekends of the year, arguably. And so that's just like a little tip for those when it comes to that is you can run some filters on Gmail to get to it faster.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I know that there's a lot of things with Google that I'm kind of diving into and learning more about.
Amazing what it
Like,
can
you
do.
can click the snooze button. I learned from Shannon the other day, that whole, I was like, oh, that's brilliant. I love it. So
I love it.
great tips. Thank you. Okay. So is there anything else that you want to share before we get into some rapid fire question type stuff?
I would say the last thing, if I may, because I was kind of vacillating between the two answers for your last one, is just a quick tip too for anyone who's advertising, which is still getting in front of the media, but there's an exchange of money, right? Which I think is great. There's a controlled message, so on and so forth. I always tell all entrepreneurs from any walk of life, if you are currently advertising anywhere, it never hurts to go back, even though the salespeople are very separate typically than editorial, right? Those are meant to be kept pretty separate for the right reasons. But it never hurts to go back and say, I just want to make sure I'm maximizing any editorial opportunities with X, right? So if you're with a local wedding magazine and they may say, oh, we actually, we don't have anything for articles, but we actually do shout outs on our social media, things like that. Like, make sure you're leveraging that. That's always something that, whether it's that, and also things that you belong to, like associations. I just joined a group, RSVP Club, European based, and they do have opportunities, media opportunities. And so, I jumped right in on that. So just make sure the low hanging fruit, those easy wins can result from the low hanging fruit on occasion.
And the easy wins make the journey so much sweeter.
It really does. Yep.
It does. So now I'm going to pull another question because I'm interested on your perspective. So, as educators, a lot of times our best client is who we were before, right? And so when I first started as a wedding planner, I put my LLC in, I made my website, I made sure I was on Google, like the basics. And all of a sudden my phone starts ringing and it's WeddingPro and magazines and, all the local chamber and, all these people are calling and they're all saying the same thing. If you pay us X amount of money, it's going to do wonders for your business, right? And maybe they have some statistics. And what I'm really big on is word of mouth marketing. And while yes, I've invested in your program, it is highly based on word of mouth marketing, I would venture to say there. So what is your thought process on that as somebody who's maybe just starting out year one and they're getting all these marketing phone calls?
Sure.
Is there like a certain strategy around that, or just whatever your thoughts are that come to mind?
That's a great question. I talk about this, it just informally with people a lot, because I know I'm more in the PR route. And so what I tell people is like, listen, if I was a venue tomorrow, a photographer tomorrow, knowing what I know, 20 years, 14 plus doing this, first and foremost, from a Google standpoint, I would make sure organically I get as close as I could to that first page. Like, I would make sure we work with a lot of people who just want want the backlinks. And so they'll get 20, 30, 40, 50 pickup features a year with us. And those links, Shannon being one of them, those links make a difference to people, And so I'd want to make sure I was good to go on that side of it. I would be big on, we're a people industry. When you look at Splendid Insights, she shares annually how couples hear about you, and Google's always number one. And then from there, it's referrals. It's going to be fellow vendors. That's going to be other people in the industry, right? It's going to be happy couples. So you'd want to make sure your client experience is where it needs to be as well. But I'm all about networking. And I know I'm coming to you as immediate past president of WIPA and, a NACE sponsor, and but I, in NSBWEP being on the Allen Council, like I walk the walk with that. And even when I was a venue, I worked for venues, I was at the top of the heap for referrals for the most part, outside of planners, which kind of went between the two. I pushed everywhere I worked. We didn't network. And the thought was, well, we're the ones who refer. And I'm like, that's the worst attitude to have. So like, I really pushed us to get more involved. So I'd want people focus on SEO. I'd want people to go ahead and make sure that they're attending local, whether it's WIPA, ILEA, NACE, MPI, PCMA, like what homegrown stuff. I don't care, Central Florida Wedding Association, ALWEP, like all sorts of things. But then also just to kind of finalize that, like those are what I would heavily focus on, but I'd also have marketing money set aside for, testing the waters with ads where it's going to be, whether there's a really strong local magazine still, which is still pervasive in a lot of markets, or whether it's going to be social media ads and things like that. Like, I'm a firm believer that you need to set a little bit of money aside. Yes, word of mouth, yes, SEO, all that, but you still want a little bit of money around to test the waters, to properly vet what makes the most sense. I've seen people who will spend a little bit of money to align themselves with certain blogs because the aesthetic is it very smartly makes sense, and they do very well with that. So that would be a bit of my mix. Now, obviously I jump in on the PR side as well, but if we're talking about more the marketing side, I would say those are the things I would be doing.
Yeah, I love that. And I think what it goes back to is just being very intentional with where you're showing up. Right? We want to make sure that we're showing up in front of the people we want to work with, and what's the best way to do that. And that just goes back to what you were saying about how you work with clients and making sure that you're putting them in front of the people that are a good match. So
100%.
All right. You ready for some fun Q&A?
I am. Let's do it. I'm ready. I'm ready / nervous.
Oh no, it's okay. It's you got these questions ahead of time, so they're nothing too crazy. But
I don't know what's gonna come out of my mouth still.
Oh, okay.
I practice, but I'm like, ooh, I might make some game day decisions here.
Love it. Okay, so what are you currently reading and or listening to?
Okay, this is where it stresses me out. So I don't read, I should be like, oh, a very smart business book, but no, I am reading, there's a brand new book out by this great royal biographer. I'm really into like British royal history. And it's all about King George, the father of Queen Elizabeth. I've been waiting for years to it come out. And so that's my big read right now, is I'm just pouring through their lives and what they went through and the abdication and all that stuff. So that's what I'm reading.
I know a few people who have been like diving into the like royal history.
I've always, it's been 30. I mean, I've been into it for 30 years plus. So since I was a little kid. So I do get my hands on a lot of it. It's like now how Bridgerton came out with Queen Charlotte's story. And I'm like, oh, great. Now everyone's going to be an expert in that area, when I actually am well read in that. Like, I don't want to hear it.
I know the truth.
Yeah, I was here first with that. So what I'm listening to, which is funny because again, I do listen to wedding industry podcasts, like full stop. I block off time every week to listen and all that. But it doesn't end there. I am super into Succession and listening along to the show Succession on HBO, and they do a recap every week. So now I'm listening to that as well. And I'm really into Marco Polo and Voxer. So I know when you say listen, you probably meant podcast, but I do a lot of communication with friends, colleagues, fellow association leaders on Marco Polo app and the Voxer app. So when you asked me what I listen to, I thought, well, I'll toss a bone on the podcast side, but really I spend my days listening and conversing with other people through those apps. That's what I spend most of my time doing if I'm listening.
I love this. I like that you went outside of the box. I
did, but I was like, let's be honest.
Yeah. Someone came on and they're like, I just listened to the entire Sam Smith album. And I'm like, not what I meant, but that's amazing.
Yeah. I appreciate that answer.
Yeah, no, I really do. Okay. And I think it's fun to hear that we all have hobbies and there's things that are outside of the business that are part of who we are. So that's really fun.
Yeah.
Okay. If we were meeting up in 1 year, this is okay. I might be setting myself up. If we were meeting up in 1 year to pop a bottle of champagne, what would we be celebrating?
So this was a great question because I had to really think about it. And today in a year from now, so as part of WIPA being immediate past president, usually once that you kind of roll off and you're done. But we just yesterday, I figured that was close enough, had our inaugural leadership development committee. And so I have, along with some really great people on the board, we've developed the first national or international, I guess you say, standing committee, which we've never had. We're still relatively new. We're growing like crazy and we need more committees. And we saw a gap with training for leaders. Like, leaders know the basics of how to be a leader, but they're not getting leadership support that they should get. And so yesterday was our first meeting. And so hopefully in a year, we've got this great group of 8 people, myself included, who's really moving the needle for, in response to this great growth over at WIPA and making sure that the leaders are supported. So hopefully we'll be toasting to that.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah.
And I'll probably have a side convo with you on that one too.
Yeah.
Okay, and then where can everyone find you and what might be coming up next?
So they can find me always at ofdconsulting.com. OFD Collective is our membership, and we have our speakers through Wedding Industry Speakers. So the biggest thing right now is we recently launched, and I'm so grateful to say this, in the last couple of months, we have a new tier for the collective, and we are working with all sorts of great thought leaders. It's a limited number. We're about 2/3 full right now, which I'm so grateful for. And it's been amazing to see the transformations already of people coming in and feeling braver about putting themselves in front of these national conferences. I'm connecting them, through education with these conference organizers. And so that's what's on the horizon for us. I'm really excited. And maybe one day I'll also finish that 1,000-page royal book. So those are the two things that I'm trying to get done.
I love it. The priorities. That's amazing.
Yeah.
What does OFD stand for?
Oh, that comes up often. So OFD. So when I was in college, and I remember how I said I was doing all those projects and stuff,
Yeah.
and I was sitting in a graphics class sitting between my friend Melissa and Tenley. I still remember this. And I turned them, I said, because I want to be a wedding planner. That was my original thing. And, God love all the wonderful wedding planners of the world, but over time I preferred working through a venue. I knew that was not going to be the path for me, for a lot of, I just wasn't the right fit long term. But I turned them and said, I think I'm going to name it One Fine Day. I just think that's and everyone's like, oh, the song. I'm like, well, it's the George Clooney movie. This was like the 90s and early 2000s. It was the George Clooney movie, but primarily. And so when I made the decision, really right after college, I said, it was within a year after college. I said, I do want to start my own business, but I want to do PR. And I thought, what? I'm not going to call it One Fine Day because one, there's like 5 of us who do wedding publicity, and that has not changed. And so I didn't want it was already confusing people it confuses people what I do sometimes if they're in the industry. Calling it One Fine Day would just make it even more confusing. That has nothing to do with anything. So I shortened it to OFD as sort of a wink and a nod to prior aspiration. So the company is OFD. It doesn't do business as anything else. It's OFD, but it's a wink and a nod to my aspirations when I was in school.
I love that. I keep hearing so many parallels. When I was in college, one of my projects was we named it Key Destination Events, and that's what I named my company.
Stop it. Oh my God, that's amazing.
Yeah. I mean, there's a million other things that you've said, but that was one of the big ones.
I wonder, I'm almost sure, hand over heart, I'd give an 80% yes on this, is when I was 22 in my final class, I had to do a big project. I'm almost sure I called it One Fine Day. I'm almost sure because I named it junior year. So what a parallel. I love that.
I love it. It's so much fun. Well, Meghan, this has been a blast. I can't wait to just continue working with you. Hopefully we'll be popping a bottle on both of our successes in the next year. And this has been great. Thank you so much for being here and pouring into.
Thank you for having me.
Celebration Pros. Yeah, absolutely.